Without further ado, I'll introduce our speaker, Rick Pollack, founder and CEO of Maker Gear, a 3D manufacturer in our backyard, Beechwood, Ohio.
Is this on? Great. First of all, my shoe's untied, I think. Thank you for having me. 3D printing. Can I get a sense of who's here? If you're students, business people. If you're really familiar with 3D printing, would you raise your hands? Something you know really well. And if you have a 3D printer. Okay, all right, good to know. All right, so questions that I get commonly asked are, what are people doing with 3D printers? What would I do with a 3D printer? What are people making? So let me start off by talking about that a little bit. So this is made by one of our super users. Those are heavily post-processed, meaning he printed them and then he finished them. But those are some speakers that he designed. I'm not sure if he designed or he made those, and they look really, really sharp. Entertainment. There's actually a video of this thing running on our Facebook page. The guy that made this is a former BattleBot champion. So if you ever heard of Vlad the Impaler, the guy who made Vlad the Impaler made this contraption called the Ball Machine. People make parts. So let's see if this works. So this part right here is a fan guard. So people commonly, it's a vacuum pump, and he printed that part to cover the fans. And props are a very common item that are printed. It's not a real gun, it's a fake gun from a video game or something like that. And of course you hear a lot about 3D printed guns. There's too much talk about that, because I think you could make a better gun in your garage with a bandsaw and a drill than you could with one of the 3D printers. Maybe down the road it'd be an issue, but I don't think so much right now. And then hobbyists. So this is part of an airframe, and he printed this portion of it right there. It's probably about that big around. So it's printed in pieces and then attached together. And then, so here's one of our customers. This is a woman. She created something to treat eczema. So she created it. She didn't like the packaging that was available in the marketplace. So she decided that she's going to make her own packaging. They bought a printer from us. So she tells me that she's running this thing all day and all night, running these little jars about this big. And then the other thing she does is she buys her own source plastic, and she makes her own filament. So one of the things that we sell, I don't know if you guys saw the printer that's out there, but you've got these spools of filament that look like wire, and we sell that for people to use in their printers. To get her cost down, she's making her own filaments. So this was from Packaging Digest. And then visualization. So somebody took their CT scans and printed their brain. Now what usually ends up with something like this is the brain gets compressed and then gets put on like a bottle opener, so you have a little brain on a bottle opener. But so I don't know exactly how helpful this is, but where visualization is helpful, if there's a surgeon and say they're doing hip replacement or something like that, they might print the joint and the bone, and they can look at it and hold it and think about it before they actually get into surgery. And then helpful. So this is a 3D printed prosthetic hands. This was a joint venture between Marvel Comics and Rice University. So our printer, one of the scientists at Rice has one of our machines. So it was used in the creation of that hand. So there's a video if you search on superhero hands. So I haven't seen this actually used. I don't know how effective it is, but you can basically make a prosthetic hand for on the order of $50. So I think that prosthetics moving forward will be a very good use of 3D printing. Because the sweet spot for 3D printing right now is if you want to make one item, or maybe you want to make 100 items, this is the technology that allows you to do that. So you don't have to invest in tooling. Tooling can be very expensive. So it might be more expensive and take longer to make each individual item, but you can make 1 or 100 of them without having to invest in tooling, which is a big deal. Okay, so A little bit about Maker Gear. I founded the company in my Shaker Heights garage in 2009. So, and I'll get into a little bit more down, for a few slides down. Our factory now is in Beechwood. We've been there for about 3 years. We design, we engineer, and we assemble using parts that we make in-house, parts that are made locally, and also parts, parts like motors and power supplies, we get those from overseas. And so much of the M2, which is out there, is actually manufactured in Northeast Ohio. So the frame, the machine parts, the extruder, the wiring harness, all that are made by local companies. Most of them are about within 30 minutes of our facility. So between the Maker Gear payroll and our local manufacturing, the company that I started in my garage in 2009, now puts millions of dollars into the local economy. So in the 3D printing industry, we're reasonably well respected, well, at least outside of Northeast Ohio. Our machine has been the top rated printer on Amazon for most of 2014, and as of today it still is, which is a good thing. And if you read the reviews and look online, you'll find most people have very positive things to say about Maker Gear and our products. Okay, so when I started the company, I actually didn't entirely know what we were going to do. I simply knew that I wanted to be in this area called the maker space. And I wanted to make a great product, I wanted to provide great customer support, and I wanted to make it right here. So, I'll kind of go through and you can kind of judge, how we're matching up to our vision. Okay, so you guys have probably heard about a company called MakerBot. They also started in 2009. They created something called the Cupcake, MakerBot Cupcake CNC machine. Well, I made, that was all back in the days when MakerBot was all open source, and they were a pretty cool company. So I made one of those, and the thing that's missing right here, there's a thing there that is called the extruder. So this thing would move around, the platform would move around, but the extruder was very unreliable, very frustrating, did not work very well, so it made it really hard to 3D print an object. So if somebody actually successfully 3D printed an object, they'd break open champagne. I mean, it was a reason for celebration. So what I did is I went to an auction here in Ohio, and I bought this little desktop micro lathe. So, I don't have a background in manufacturing. I don't think I'd ever used a lathe before in my life, so I really didn't know a lot what was going on. So I showed up in some residential neighborhood. The auction was in a garage. It was a guy who had owned a business and then retired and was working out of his garage. And so there was some really nice equipment, like a $4,000 engine lathe was sold for about $600, and a Bridgeport, which usually sells for a couple $1,000s, went for $130. The one thing that had a bidding war was that. So I ended up buying this for $250, and I later learned you can buy them new for $400, but it doesn't really matter. It served the purpose. So what I started doing, and I had no experience with this, there was a lot of trial and error and so forth. I started making these little parts in my garage, my unheated Northern Ohio garage in winter with my framer's gloves. Started making parts like this to make extruders for people with 3D printers. So I made parts for people with 3D printers, and so I was effectively either helping people that were making their own or fixing MakerBot cupcakes. And then about in late 2010, so we did this extruder stuff pretty much for about a year and a half. And then about late 2010, we introduced our first machine. We sold this, and it was called a RepRap Mendel, and we would, so these parts in white were all printed parts. And so we would ship a box that had all these parts in it. There was threaded rod, there were screws, there were electronics, there was an extruder. I mean, this was a big old box of stuff. And the end user had to take this thing, put it apart, and if they were successful, and it was not an easy thing to do, they would have kind of a rudimentary 3D printer. What amazes me is I still get emails, people are still running these, and we still stock replacement parts, so, and spare parts for people that, are still running these. And we ship these all over the world. I mean, back in those days, I was more likely to sell something in New Zealand than I was in Cleveland. Fortunately, that's changing a little bit, but, we would send these all over the world. Okay, So then about mid-2011, we came out with our second machine. This one uses, this frame right here is laser cut plywood. So I had a laser cutter in the nook in my house, a little room between the garage and the house, where we would laser cut these frames, and we took over my kitchen, my dining room, my basement, my garage. I literally had people working in my garage, and we would make these machines. This was called the Mosaic, and there's a picture of it that I took at Launch House. And we always had a backlog. We could not make these machines fast enough. And then so the problem with this machine was, and let me just point out, this right here, that's the extruder part that we made for other people making their own machines for the first year of Maker Gear. The problem with plywood is that it's not precise. We would put these together, and this portion of it right here, 3 out of 5 of those we have to throw away because they would not work properly. So it was always really hard to get this thing to line up just right, and if it got humid, it might change its shape a little bit. So it was a great little machine, but wood was hard to work with. So in the spring of 2012, we came out with the Maker Gear M2. That's the machine that's out there on the table. Now, when it came out, it did not look quite like that. It was silver, and it's improved incrementally over the last few years. But that's when we released it. So the big thing was moving from wood to metal was going from being a maker to being a manufacturer. We had to learn how to fabricate metal. We had to learn how to machine metal. We had to learn how to finish metal. So the original frames, they had a stainless steel finish, and we would send those out to be a process called electropolishing, which would make them look like chrome. And they would get scratched up, and it was just one fiasco after the other. We had problems with vendors. I mean, it was just pretty much a complete nightmare to get machines put together and assembled. So I went to, there's a place called the CITC, Cleveland Industrial Training Center on Brook Park, and I went there, and I would go there from 8 a.m. to noon. And this is a 4-month class, and I'd learn how to operate a CNC machine, the big industrial CNC machines. And through that class, I developed the confidence to bid on a big industrial CNC machine, blind, online, at an auction in Phoenix. So I ended up buying this machine, sight unseen. I didn't know if it worked. It took 6 weeks before I knew whether or not it worked. So, it's a lot of money, and it's, pretty stressful not knowing. And then I also almost didn't bid on it because I knew when it arrived, it wasn't going to fit through our garage door. So they get this thing on the truck, and they cover it with a tarp, and the truck pulls up, and it's rainy and it's wet, and our thing is sloped downhill, so he's got to pick this thing up and bring it uphill on the slick truck, and it doesn't fit through the door, and it's cold and it's wet. So we're out there trying to figure out how to take this thing, enough of this apart for it to fit through. So we managed to take this little piece of it off, and it left about 1 inch on each side. And this amazing forklift driver in this massive forklift was able to pick this thing up and maneuver it through with just 1 inch to spare on each side. So we did get it in. And then a couple weeks later, I found out that the machine was in excellent condition, and it's down today for the first time in a while, but it's been a very reliable machine. We have a global supply chain, so though my business ran out of my house and is in Beechwood, we do a lot of our manufacturing here, but we also have to bring in some of our parts mostly from China. That's power supplies and motors and stuff that you just can't get any other way. So there's a lot of parts. The stuff has to ship on time. It has to get through customs. You have to have all these parts in stock together, or you can't produce a machine. So that was supply chain is, when you're manufacturing, my background's in software, no background in manufacturing. Manufacturing is hard. Even on the good days, it's hard. And managing that supply chain is 50% of your battle. And then, of course, there's capital constraints. So my house was the collateral for, a lot of the inventory and the upfront costs that we were dealing with. And so at this point in time, we're talking, let's see, what was this? We're talking spring 2012. So for 2012 and early 2013, we had an 8 to 12 week backlog. People were sending us their money and waiting 2 to 3 months for us to ship their machine. And then that last one about how much time you have, I could go on for a while about this, but I'll move on to the next slide here. Okay, so here's a shot. This picture is probably a year and a half old of what our production looked like. I mean, those are all machines that have all been sold, that are all waiting to be shipped, like those 2 boxes, sitting up front right there. We were, extremely busy. We had, we could not ship machines fast enough. So in the spring of 2013, in late 2012, early 2013, the U.S. government created something called NAMI, which is an institute in Youngstown to support the growing additive manufacturing industry. And so in spring of 2013, we connected with them and went to the first Robotics World Championships in St. Louis. And it was great. We had our machines running, we had a booth, it was packed, it was just a great experience. And we provided the first, the prize of donating a machine to the team that won the additive manufacturing contest. I mean, that's a machine that we had prototyped. We never took that machine into production. We ended up giving them an M2, but we provided the prize, and we worked with them. It was just a great experience. And then things kind of hit a rough patch. And I call this no guarantees, because when you start a business, there is no guarantee that you're going to be successful. There is no guarantee that people are going to help you. And you're going to run into obstacles, and it depends on, it's your choice how you deal with them. But in the summer of 2013, we ran into some pretty rough stuff. The first thing was a guy by the name of Jonathan Murray. He used to be a partner in a local venture capital firm called Early Stage Partners. He was transitioning out of the organization, so I engaged Jonathan personally to help us work on our capital strategy. He's a professional investor, very smart guy, so he was helping us with our capital strategy. And I really haven't talked about this publicly before. It's not something that I really want to talk about. I'm bringing it up because it had a very serious impact on us, so I'm kind of debating on how much detail I want to go into. So Jonathan first helped us with the LCC Innovation Fund, where you can apply. There's 2 categories. There's a $25,000 grant and a $100,000 grant. Now, it's a competitive thing. There's no guarantee you're going to win. So we applied to that. We went through a couple rounds, and we were declined because we were told that we were too mature. So you can see the situation that I'm describing to you about how we're backlogged and don't have enough capital to buy equipment. I'll tell you what, $100,000 at that point, if we had received that money, it would have had a transformative effect on our organization. I have no ill will against LCCC. That's a competitive event. It's just unfortunate that we were declined for that reason. Now, things took a much darker turn here because Jonathan brought in a guy by the name of Joe Keithley, who was the guy from Keithley Instruments, a very successful local entrepreneur. And Joe was had at least somewhat of an interest in what we were doing. And the idea was that maybe Joe could bring up a group of local angels that could invest in my company, maybe something on the order of like $500,000 to help us with some growth capital. Well, so Joe and Jonathan go out to do some due diligence. And the first place they go is to ThinkBox. Now, I have no relationship with ThinkBox. And in March or spring of 2013, when they were looking at 3D printers, they wouldn't even talk to us. I mean, there was no conversation. They would not talk to us. But the thing is, I had no relationship with ThinkBox. I'd met the executive director on one occasion for about a half an hour, and it was a good conversation. I mean, it was positive, but they spoke poorly of us, and it really had a very negative impact. And then the next stop they made was America Makes. And I already showed you this slide. I mean, we had a great relationship with America Makes, or at least I thought so. So they go out there, and people do things intentionally and unintentionally, and this one falls into the unintentional category. But they also said poor things about us. And so by the time these 2 visits were over, that angel possibility was dead. There was no guarantee that it would have happened, but it was dead before it ever had a chance to get started. So let me show you the impact of that. So about a few months after that, so at that point in time, we were only selling our product through our website, and that was enough business. But Amazon had been contacting us about becoming a vendor for them, which basically means Amazon issues POs, a semi backs up to your loading dock, you put the pallets on the truck, they drive off to their warehouses, and and then they go online. We did that with them. They were issuing us POs, and whenever we would get them machines, they were pretty much selling out within a few days off of Amazon. So Amazon issued, let me see where I'm in slide-wise, I gotta figure out, okay. So Amazon issued us so many POs that we could not deliver products. I mean, it was over $150,000 of POs that we just could not deliver on. And we were starting to actually get fined because we were being too slow. So what we had to do in early 2014 was we switched from being an Amazon vendor to selling through Amazon and canceled $150,000 of POs because we could not deliver against them. So think about what that investment in the summer would have done at this point, because we needed engineering, we needed capital. I mean, there was a tremendous opportunity here that we reached out to the community to see if we could get some help, and it did not go well. So what we did, the thing is, I'm busy, I'm running the company, I can't really worry about that. I've got to focus on, what needs to get done. But what I can tell you is, it's very stressful. So this kind of stuff is driving your stress level up. So it's hard enough to manufacture this stuff, but when stuff like that is happening, it's extremely sobering to find out that the people that should have your back, or at least not have and be against you, it's a very sobering experience. So in 2014 to 2015, what we focused on was within our capacity. Our growth was organic, and by organic I mean the revenue that came in is what funded our growth. The money that came in paid our salary, paid up for all of our equipment, and also paid for us to buy more capital, to buy more inventory. So we grew organically. We bootstrapped, and so we reduced our backlog, we increased our production capacity, and we hired engineers. And this is the key thing, because though we're in Beechwood, we compete with people across the world. I mean, our competitors are in Europe, in the United States, in China. My little factory's in Beechwood, but everybody's selling through Amazon, or everybody's selling through their websites. My competition is global. And the only way that you can compete in the global market is by having, at least from what I wanted to do with Maker Gear, is having great engineering. So in 2014, we were able to start hiring, with the revenue that we were generating, hiring these really good engineers. And that makes such a tremendous difference. So using these engineers, we were able to start streamlining our processes. We were start to be able to make product improvements. And so that's what so after that, the summer of 2013, we just focused on, doing what we could do. So, we are still have a 2 to 3 week backlog for our product, and we're still really busy. So, it didn't kill us, but it just, you can see the difference between what a little bit of local support would have meant versus not getting any. So what's next? Right now, like I said, we still have a 2 to 3 week backlog, so we need to eliminate our backlog. We need to have our product in stock, because we're losing sales. Because if people come to our site and say, wow, it's going to take me 3 weeks to get a machine, in this competitive market, 2 years ago, it didn't matter. But in this competitive market, that's going to hurt your sales. We get emails pretty much every week for people that want to distribute our product across the globe. I got emails today from Brazil, in places in Europe. I even got a request from somebody in Iran who wants to distribute our product. Obviously we can't do that, but we can set up networks. We don't have the inventory, we don't have the products to send them right now. So, and then of course I still want to hire more engineers. We're working on new products. We've developed several new products that we never released for various reasons. So we want to get some new products out as well. And we need to expand. And I want to thank a couple of people locally. Bob Sobko, he works for Jumpstart and YBI and Case. He's the one person in the Cleveland economic development community who has consistently been a champion of Maker Gear. And then I also want to thank Bill Macy. He used to be with America Makes, and he left America Makes. He's doing his own thing now, but he was also very supportive of Maker Gear along the way. And I think that is the end of my my slides. So I want to make sure that I was concerned that that's going to come across a little bit too negative, and I don't want that to do it. I went into that stuff because on the outside, we were really busy. We're getting great reviews, but here, being in Cleveland, the lack of local support it really makes a big difference. We need to have we need to have local support. I mean, that is the difference between us doing well and us doing great. And by doing great, that means we can put more money into the local community. I mean, we've made a serious commitment to our manufacturing here, and we need some help to take that to the next level. So I'd like to take questions now. So does anybody have any questions? That's a great question. I'm glad that you asked it, because the reality is we have done the great big zilch in terms of marketing. We have done nothing to date. You know, everything that we've done, we have a very tiny AdWords campaign that, you know, it's a few dollars. It's basically to pay Google for using their services, but we have a very tiny, but in terms of real investment in the marketing, we have not done anything yet. So that's something we're gonna have to work on moving forward, you know, hiring some marketing professionals. You know, there's a lot of stuff that we can do in that space. At this point in time, I don't have anybody to work on that. I have engineers and I have people in production. I mean, we basically run the company, and, you know, marketing has been the thing that we have not worried about because we've been busy enough that we haven't had to worry about it. But moving forward, I'd love to, you know, bring on a very, very savvy marketing person. Well, we sub out almost all of our production now. You know, one of the reasons that I bought that machine was we were having our parts made locally, and we were having supply issues, quality issues. And, you know, I went to one of our suppliers and asked him why, you know, we're having these problems. And he said to me, I can't hold the tolerance on the tool change, which was complete BS. I didn't realize it at the time, but when I told his quality manager what he told me, the look in his eyes told me that that was complete BS. And that's why I went to school at CITC to learn CNC, because I was tired of dealing with people that were doing stuff like that. So we bought that machine, we brought the expertise in-house, we started making our parts. Now we've sent out almost all that work. We do very little in-house. Now I'm more focused on having prototyping capabilities in-house and using other people to manufacture our stuff. We still assemble in-house. Well, for the first, 9 months, it was just me. And then for the first 2 years, it was Karen, who's my wife. So I was doing, I was making the products and she was handling the orders and shipping them. And then maybe 2 years into it, we started, bringing in our first employee or two. And so it was like late 2012 before we had our first real engineer come on board. Until then, we had a couple people that were doing assembly work, but we got our first engineer in 2013. We've got multiple engineers now. So for the first 3 years, it was really 2 or 3 of us. And then that's the point where we also moved out of my house. I think one thing that I can do, and it's something that I'm considering kind of doing now, and that is, ThinkBox has ignored us, but I still think it's a great local resource. One of the things I'm considering is perhaps doing some kind of contest to get, that place should be packed with high school kids, because you've got all kinds of equipment there. If you have an idea, you can go over there and make it. So I'm thinking maybe I could do some kind of contest or, some way facilitate getting lots of high school kids over there, because, the natural juices are there. Give them the tools that they need and give them some kind of incentive to just pursue what interests them would be one idea that I have. I don't know that I have a great answer to that. I'm so much in the weeds. Like, this has been a particularly difficult week. Let me give you a story. How about that? This is Monday, okay? And I'll go to Tuesday next. So on Monday, so we'd shipped a package. We ship all over the world. Sometimes we ship to China. We'd shipped a package to China via USPS Express, Priority Express, which is basically fast international shipping. And overall, USPS does a good job. So this package is going to China. Somehow, so USPS hands off these packages to FedEx on these international shipments. So somehow, when they put the label on the box from USPS to FedEx, they put the wrong label on. So we get a call on Monday from a guy in Canada who had received a 3D printer that he had not ordered because he had ordered some vintage camera parts off of eBay, and somehow he got our printer. So the guy in China did not get his machine. And this guy has, but neither party is willing to accept responsibility, or we have to spend hours on the phone to get it. So we have to pay to have that machine shipped back to us so that we can get it back. Okay, that was the first thing on Monday. The second thing on Monday is we had shipped a machine to a school in Minnesota, and apparently it was so rural there that the post office used cars to make the deliveries instead of vans or trucks, and the box was too big to fit in the car. So the post office had called the school and said, "Hey, can you come pick this up?" So we get this completely outraged email. "This is completely outrageous. We demand our shipping be refunded because we should not have to go pick up that package." Okay, so that was Monday. Then on Tuesday, 2 of my production machines went down. So one of them is limping along right now. The other one is still down. Fortunately, we're ahead on production on that one, so it's not killing us right now. But we're trying to find spare parts, and the people that service us, our CNC machine, they are so busy that just getting them out for a service call is a challenge right now. So if you are interested in machining, there is a lot of demands, as far as I can tell, in that field right now. My background's in software, and so about late 90s, I got involved with the whole .com thing, and so I did a startup. I was a minority shareholder in that company, and the VP of product development, and so I went through the concept, and we went through an exit, and so I had some experience with that. I already spent that money, so it wasn't available, but it was the thing is that I lived off my savings, and just I figured we would I can deal with the insecurity of that, because I know that eventually we're going to find our way. So no, she did not work. She worked with me, and that first year we didn't make any money. And that second year we didn't make a whole lot of money, but in the third year it was 10x what it was the second year. So it was so we started seeing some serious growth, and our account was calling me a superstar and that kind of stuff. But I also knew what the reality was of how hard it was to get to do manufacturing, and it's still a challenge every day. Did I answer your question? Yes. Okay, is there another question? Yes. We have consumables made for us. Other companies run the extruders. We buy from OEMs, put our label on it, and resell it. But we try and find vendors that produce quality stuff. Any more questions? Gary? Engineering, inventory. And then there's some other stuff as well, but primarily, great engineers and inventory, you can do anything. I mean, even without marketing, because people write about us. We've got good exposure through Amazon. We get good reviews. I mean, we produce a great product. Even in this competitive market, if we simply produce a great product and support it, and people are happy with us, we can grow that way. If we do marketing, we can accomplish even more, but the start would be engineering inventory. I think it probably has to do more with me personally. I can be a little bit challenging to deal with. So I think that at the same time, there's a difference between dealing with me and supporting my company, because my company is building something here. So I don't know. I think when I probably stepped on some toes. I'm not really sure, but I just know the impact of it. Do you have a question? Well, up to this point, differentiation was not even that big of a deal. Now it's more like we're focusing more on quality, making a quality product for people, and customer support, because we can't compete against the stuff that's coming in, the low-cost stuff that's coming from China. There's no way for us to go down to that level. We've got to operate at a higher price point, and basically we need to produce a great product and provide great support. That's what we do, and that's why we are still doing well. Well, see, when I originally started Maker Gear, my intent was I was going to import these low-cost laser cutters from China and resell them. I had that all set up. All I had to do was send them a payment, and it was like, but I don't want to import. I want to make something. So I did not execute that plan. I just stopped that and said, I need to go out now and figure out what I'm going to do, and I just followed my interest. And it led me to this desktop 3D printing fledgling movement, and I just jumped right in. And so when I started making those parts that I told you about, I would then go online and help people get their printers working, and they in turn would come and buy parts from me, and then they'd tell people, and they'd buy parts from me. So our growth came from me going online and helping people get their machines working, and it blew up from there. I'm better at starting. And I've actually been looking for somebody that could potentially come in and run the company. I've talked to people. I just can't pay $500,000 for some of the people that I've talked to. But the skill set is that I'm very ADD, and I can get highly passionate about certain things and completely neglect other things. So Karen, my wife, is the real engine that makes the company work. She is not entrepreneurial at all, hates the idea of entrepreneurship, but she can show up every day, execute, list, execute. You've got to have that person. I'm the guy that makes sure that we have a viable product, and I deal with the product development side and making sure that helping to make sure our production runs. But she is the one that runs the company in the sense of making sure that the trains run on time. I don't think, we've had people contact us, but I think usually when people contact us like that, they're trying to get information. So I don't know that we have. Nothing serious. Okay, so like this year in desktop space that we're in, how are we doing on time? Okay. The big thing this year is materials. So in the desktop 3D printing space, just an explosion. For a long time it was ABS and PLA. Now there's nylon, PET, polycarb, carbon fiber, all kinds of stuff. So that's but in 5 years, let me look out more 10 or 15 years. I think there's going to be, right now there's a huge value in aerospace because with metal printers, you can print porous metal where you can't machine that like that. So you can make these really strong pieces that are really light, which is great for aircraft. 5, 10, 15 years in medicine, printing tissues, organs, bones, all that kind of stuff is just going to be, it's hard to put your hands around, how much of an impact that's going to have. The real sweet spot right now for it is for people that want to do something that's a one-off. If you have an idea for something, you can make it on your desktop, tweak it, print it again, refine it, and then if you want to sell a product or if you want to use it in your house, whatever, you have the power to do the one-offs, which is something that before this, 3D printing's been around for 20, 25 years. It's just the machines were incredibly expensive, $100,000, or a professional machine right now, the low end is $25,000, and the material is very expensive. We sell a $2,000 machine, and the material costs $30 a kilogram. Did I answer your question? Okay. Well, I mean, in the X and Y, in the Z axis, you can adjust that. You can get down very fine if you want to. We usually recommend 0.1 to 0.25 millimeters, which is 0.1 millimeters is the thickness of a sheet of laser printer paper. So each layer it's printing is the thickness of a sheet of paper. In X and Y, we say to about 1/4 millimeter. You can get, really, people that know what they're doing can get tighter, but I'd say about 1/4 millimeter is realistic. It's not quite the same as machining. That's why we machine a lot of our parts, because we need those kind of tolerances for the machine itself. It's one thing to make a machine that works when you take it out of the box. It's another thing to make a machine that's still going to be working a year from now or 2 years from now and still be producing the same kind of parts. Did you have a question? Do you mean 3D modeling software, or do you mean software to run the machine? 3D modeling. Because there's 3 components. There's the machine, there's the 3D modeling software, and then because the parts are printed in layers, there's software called a slicer, which slices it into thin layers and produces what's called G-code, which actually runs the machine. So the 3D modeling software, there's SolidWorks, Inventor, SketchUp, Blender, Rhino. There's dozens of programs that range anywhere from free to many thousands of dollars. We use SolidWorks in-house. For software to run the machine, you have a choice between using open source software, and we also resell a package from a company in Cincinnati that contains the slicer and the software to run the machine. Our machine has an 8-inch by 10-inch by 8-inch build area. We may come out with a larger machine. Part of the problem is, it's been enough challenge for us to ship one machine, we ship it assembled, and we ship it as a kit. So people that want to put the machine together themselves, they can buy the kit and put it together. So we basically have 2 assembly lines. Getting a third and a fourth running, we'll get there. But it's hard. Well, see, the nice thing about the reason we were able to enter the space is the patents that were on the stuff expired. So we're operating in a post-patent space. So we're not dealing with the most high-tech stuff. What we're doing is bringing the cost down. We're making it affordable. We're bringing technology that's been around for 20 years and bringing it to the desktop and making it affordable. And there was a question here? Yes. The kit's $1,475 and the assembled machine is $1,775. So you can spend a little under $2,000 for hours. Yes. Well, no and yes. Or it depends. You can run ABS, PLA, nylon, polyester, polycarbonate, soft stuff. We have a new extruder that runs all that stuff. That's not shipping with our machines yet. It's an optional user upgrade, but it's been tested with all that stuff. It also runs at a higher temperature. And you only need to switch build surfaces if the material you're printing with doesn't stick to the standard one. And it's a matter of picking it up, putting whatever else on. It's very easy to swap out. Anybody else have a question? I think that's a wrap.